What is the role of the Black church in America today? I know for many of you, this issue has been the topic of many conversations in beauty and barbershops, community organizations, college campuses, at family gatherings, and yes, within the Black church. I must admit, I was quite surprised about the answer I received from today's guest, Nick Taliaferro.
Welcome to the Empowerment Zone with Ramona Houston, where we zone in on Black and Brown relations and our journey to empowering our communities.
Nick is a program host at WURD Radio, minister, vocalist, and journalist based in Philadelphia. He has an interesting perspective, and he backs up his argument with biblical text. I cannot wait to get your feedback on his ideas and our discussion. Enjoy our conversation, and make sure you subscribe to our podcast and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. I appreciate your continued support. Hello, I have Nick Taliaferro here this morning, and I am so excited to have you here, Pastor.
Well, I mean, the way, call me Pastor. The way you say my name, it makes me feel that I might be a man of real value and perspicacity there, Pastor Nick Taliaferro, I tell you. Yeah, it's good to see you, Dr. Ramona.
It's good to see you. I have really enjoyed being on your radio show, WURD Radio.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoy hearing your perspectives about a variety of issues. And I'm so happy that you would join me on the Empowerment Zone and be my guest.
It's a real privilege. A little turnabout is absolute fair play. And I'm looking forward to this.
Well, can you, I know you're a pastor, a radio host, a community leader. Can you tell me a little bit about your evolution and how you evolved to become all of these things for the community of Philadelphia?
Interesting question. I mean, because the only thing I ever thought I would do was pastor. When I went away to school at 17, I thought the only thing I would ever do was pastor a church. I never wanted to be a radio evangelist, or I never wanted to be anything except a pastor. And after 16 years in the pastorate and 4 building programs, I burned out. I flamed out. And the next thing I knew, I was doing a radio program. I went into broadcasting and launched my career in radio and did that for 6 years. And then another management company bought the radio station, and I was out of a job. And the mayor of the city of Philadelphia called and said, "I'd like for you to lead our faith-based initiatives program," which was just rolling off the press. It was hot right around 2000. George Bush was president, and the faith community was starting to launch itself very actively into the political atmosphere. And so I became the city of Philadelphia's executive director of faith-based initiatives, and I became the de facto chair of the U.S. Conference of Mayors Faith-Based Initiatives and Ex-Offender Reintegration Program, which led me into really high government. And from there, I went to become the executive director of the Commission on Human Relations. In the meantime, I got involved in gospel music as a recording voice and artist, along with a couple of groups. And then I left there and began to work for prisons and then an educational system, went back to radio, went back to pastoring. And so it's an ongoing melange of activities, all circling around the same thing, which is the betterment of people where they are, with the tools and the resources at our disposal, whether it's from the pulpit, or from the government perspective, or from the broadcast perspective. It's all the same thing from different perspectives.
Yeah, so you have a really wide-ranging perspective of how to address challenges that face the community, looking at it from a governmental perspective, from a pastor, from a community leader. And so with you being a pastor and
Today, our topic we're going to cover is the role, relevance, and future of the urban Black church.
Hmm.
I'm very curious what you see as where the Black church needs to go, especially when you look at how younger generations are kind of leaving the Black church and how you see this growth of this prosperity ministry without
Ah,
necessarily dealing with the issues of the day. I'm just very curious about what what you see going on in the
hmm.
Black church.
I appreciate the question, and it makes me want to study it even deeper just by considering it. The Black church has always, when you speak of the Black church, you typically are talking about churches that are the center and focus of Black communities, whether they're urban or rural. But when you really talk about the Black church, you typically are talking about urban churches that have factored into the movement that led Black people toward the center of American culture. Your Ebenezer Baptist in Atlanta, your Concord Baptist in New York, and other churches like that. At one point, they were the source of identity and empowerment for Black people. People went to church for the purpose of establishing and safeguarding their identity. It was the place where we could be who we were without shame or assault. At least we thought, which is why when they blew up that church in Birmingham in Martin Luther King's day, it was such an assault on the sensitivities and sensibilities of Black people, because that was sacred. That's why so much of the civil rights movement took place in churches. It was sacred, and Black people went to the church. It didn't matter where you lived. I mean, when integration began to move in and Black people could live wherever they wanted to, they would drive back to their old neighborhood to go to church to get their identity and their potato salad and their fried chicken, you see. And so, but that's no longer true. As a matter of fact, it is the very opposite now. Black churches are no longer the center of the life of Black people. And that's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but now only 4 in 10 Black people attend a non-Black congregation, and 60% of Black people say that when it comes to finding a church, the race is not important. I mean, so it is no longer the identity center of the community. But not only that, Black people used to come back to identify with the struggle. Now Black people are leaving the city. They will drive by the urban Black church to go out to the suburbs where they can find a parking lot and where they can have greater amenities for their children. They will drive by the church because church used to be a return to identity and struggle. Now church is an escape from the rigors of struggle. And so in the old days, churches would be identified by biblical struggle names, Mount Zion, Ebenezer, and all. Nowadays, churches the names are underscoring ambitions and aspirations, higher calling, greater growth, upper, higher ground, and things that talk about what I'm aspiring towards. One of my good friends has a church here in Philadelphia, and the church, if you saw it, you wouldn't even think church. It was, it's a church that talks about higher ideals and things like that. And so the church is changing. It is no longer where people go for identity reinforcement and support. It is no longer where people go to identify with struggle. It's where people go to escape the struggle, to look for respite. And so the question now becomes, what role will it play in our community and in our culture?
When you look at you say you don't look at it as a problem in terms of the changes going on in the Black church.
It can be problematic. It can be, but it is not necessarily a problem, because the church, from a strictly theological perspective, the church was not called into existence to become a social services mitochondria for a community. The church is called into existence to be the expression of the principles and the ethics of the kingdom of God on earth, to prepare this world for the return of a king and of a God who is otherworldly, as it were. So it wasn't called into existence for that. But as communities may exhibit principles that are opposed to the kingdom of God, like discrimination and bigotry and prejudice, then the church must speak to it, which is how the Black church became what it became. As long as the church is speaking truth to power, and that power doesn't have to be white folks, it doesn't have to be bigots and prejudice. I mean, look, the church needs to speak the truth to the power of, for example, right now there's evil power in our communities where a lot of young Black men are picking up guns as a distorted way of claiming power, and the murder rate is going out of control. The church needs to speak to that power. And so as long as we are fulfilling that role, we don't have to become, I mean, the reason why the church became the central source in the Black community is because nothing else was allowed to. We didn't have Black banks. We didn't have Black law firms. We didn't have the church started colleges because we didn't have colleges, and the church started insurance companies because we didn't have them. Now we do. We have Black civic and social organizations. And so the church doesn't have to take on the role that it once took on. I see that.
I totally want to push back on you on that.
That would not be the first time.
Because I do see the church as a tool for advancing social justice, and I believe that should be one of its purposes. Because when you look at, if you want to take Jesus, for example, or you can go to the Old Testament, it was all about, to me, bringing justice on earth, and creating good on earth. And
it is.
To me, the church now, or at least the Black church now, does not seem to be fulfilling that role, in my opinion, because of the need to be what, they want to be comfortable. It's uncomfortable to challenge power, right? It
is,
and it's easier to talk about prosperity, and it.
Well, I mean, I hear me well. I am not saying that you don't do that. I'm simply saying that the church does not have to be the center of it any longer. I mean, when you have an NAACP, you have an urban league, you have a Black Lives Matter movement. What the church does now is it supports those movements. It doesn't have to be the center of these things any longer. There was a time where you had to, because nothing else existed. The church had to be the place where you started a savings and loan or a credit union, because there was nothing else. But now you can support other things. We have Black lawyers, we have Black accountants, we have Black doctors, we have Black engineers. And so the church doesn't have to assume that role, but it does have to speak truth to evil and to powers that are aligned against that which is in accordance with the principles of the kingdom that is yet to come. So yeah, you have to decry injustice when you see it, but you don't have to take the place of Black Lives Matter. You don't have to take in Georgia, you have the Georgia Project, the election, the political power that we don't, the church doesn't have to assume that role. You support individuals who are working within that community. I mean, that the role of the church is to exemplify the spiritual ethics and principles of the kingdom which is to come, in the midst of a kingdom that is not always in agreement with them, and to cry aloud and spare not when those principles clash one with the other. So the church cries out and says discrimination is wrong. The church cries out and says that economics are lopsided when you can spend $1 million on a missile, but you can't feed children that you forced people to give birth to. You have to speak out on those things. But you don't have to form, your organization doesn't have to exist to do them. And in the old days, it did have to exist to do them because there was nothing else. Now it's changed. Now there are other entities in place. We have law firms, shoot.
So when you look at all the other institutions that exist, to your point, what do you see as the role of the urban Black church now? If it's not about social justice, what is it about?
I didn't say it wasn't about social justice. I said it doesn't have to take on the central role of
Okay,
doing it. What
understood.
the church is about is forming communities where individuals can be built up and fortified on those principles and those ethics and those values that undergird good social justice, good economic justice, good environmental justice. It's if churches, would focus on that, building up people and nurturing people in relationship context. That's what a church is. It's a community that of people in relationship, and the word typically used spiritually is covenant relationship with one another, and we remind each other of justice, and we remind each other of the principles and ethics of taking care of the environment and all. And you build up the people, and then you send them out, and they work with the NAACP, and they work with the Georgia Project, and they work with the Urban League and so forth. And then the church does its spiritual work of fortifying these individuals. Yeah.
So how can the church do that when you see this, as you spoke of, this exodus from the Black church, particularly in the urban centers and among younger people?
And that's what I meant by it's not all bad. I mean, what people are getting away from now is the trappings of church. They're getting away from churchianity, where a church where you've got to have the show, if you get my drift, and they're looking more towards community and covenant and relationship, and so that's what I mean by it's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily good. It's according to how you look at it and what you do with it. What I'm saying now is that the church is no longer at the center of urban life. It isn't. I mean, younger people in particular, 60% of church members say that churches need to diversify, and so it is, whether we like it or not. And then the pandemic came, where people became members of bedside Baptists, and they realized that they could fellowship in their pajamas and fluffy slippers. And I don't know how many of those people are coming back, and so now we have to figure out other ways to make disciples and to send those disciples into the world to do good. And that's getting us away from the show, where you go to church and then there's a certain, people actually believe that 11 o'clock on Sunday, or in my case on a Saturday, is holy. They think that's a holier time. There's nothing holy about that time. It's just time people choose to worship. And a lot of churches now are worshiping at different times. They're getting away from religion, and they're looking for a spiritual journey, some realities that will allow them to grow. But the problem is nowadays people are conflating spirituality with successful terrestrial life, and that is, if I really love God and God really loves me, I'm going to get a Bentley. And if I really love God and God really loves me, then I will not only have a nice house, but I'll have a summer cottage too.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are starting to perceive it that way.
So how can we how can the church become more relevant to today's society? What do you see as the direction, the future of the Black church?
To first of all, to get back in its lane, to realize that we had to become urban developers. We had to become financial institutions to seed grow, financial and economic stability for our community, because nobody else would do it. But we don't have to do that anymore. We can get back in our lane, which has become the spiritual community that articulates, enunciates, and promulgates the ethics and values of what it means to be a part of the kingdom. Basically the idea of a church is to, you pray that prayer, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Our idea is to exemplify and to actualize the tenets of the kingdom until it comes. When people come into your church, they should be able to get a glimpse of what heaven looks like, which means when people make a mistake, somebody forgives them. When people fall, somebody helps them up. That's what a church is supposed to be, to get back to that. And in doing so, to fortify and build up people who are better equipped to do the work of working within the NAACP and Black Lives Matter and Urban League and other groups, to get back into our lane and to realize that is our task, to create covenant communities that so exemplify the tenets and the ethics of the kingdom, that when people walk out of our church doors, that whatever organization they join immediately becomes better.
I'm just flabbergasted because I did not think you were going to take that approach, but it makes sense. Your perspective in argument makes sense.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who have never heard Dr. Ramona on my show, I want you to know that now I'm flabbergasted, because normally, I will be honest with you. And talking with other ministers, I get the same pushback. I mean, take note, the white church in America didn't take on the role of becoming the nexus and mitochondrion of the community. Nobody went to the white church and the white community and said, "Hey, look, we need you to stand up for our students," and such. They went to the Rotary Club or the Knights of Columbus or something. They went to the credit union or the bank, or the white church didn't take on that role. It took on that role in the Black community because it had to.
Right. Well, we have a different experience.
It had to. But we didn't take on that role because somewhere is written in the book of Thessalonians, "Thou shalt become a credit union." Yea, verily, thou must become the NAACP. We took on that role because we had to. But the church is called upon in the book of Matthew, to be that institution that stands up against the gates of hell, takes charge, and replicates the kingdom, so that those things that are a part of our culture and our world, that are opposed to those things that are part of the culture of the kingdom that is yet to come, do not do so without our lusty, vociferous protest. And the other things, I mean, pastors used to have to be, they would be the president of the credit union, they would start an insurance company, they'd start the college, and they would be the chairman of this board and that, because we would, first of all, it used to be that they were only educated people in the community. Well, the last church I pastored, there were a bunch of people more educated than I was. There was no topic in that church beyond theology where I was the de facto authority, and so church should step back into, that's what I meant by it's not necessarily bad. Now, there are places where the church still has to take on the role of the omnibus. They have to do a little bit of everything because there's nothing else. But, in larger cities like Atlanta and Philly and New York and Chicago, there are all sorts of institutions out there that exist that can do the work. And the church can do the part of building up the people to make those institutions run and fly.
I'm a big advocate for higher education, and I know you are too. And so we've reached our portion in our interview where we talk about strategies for college success. So could you tell me what college or colleges did you attend? What was your major or majors and degrees? And then what strategy would you give to ensure that students are successful in college?
I'm a proud graduate of the HBCU in Huntsville, Alabama, known as Oakwood University, graduating there with honors in theology and communication. And then I attended grad school at Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan, and completed my MDiv coursework in 1980. Colleges, nowadays, especially as distance learning is becoming more normalized. You remember back when you were in school, and Lord knows back when I was in school, you went to class and you sat there. Nowadays, a larger number of people are starting to take distance learning. Colleges are no longer places where people necessarily become a part of college cultural life. And so I think things you used to catch in college now have to be taught. I believe that what we have to really reemphasize in college are those skills. We used to call them soft skills, how to build relationships and so forth. I believe that colleges need to start leaning heavily in the direction of making soft skills necessary human skills. Courses on how to do conflict resolution in relationships, and we used to call it civics and social studies. You don't have that anymore. And I may never use algebra, but God knows I'm going to have to learn how to live with people. And colleges need to make that core curriculum for their students. How do you live with, get along with, work within the construct of human relationships in the civic community in which you're placed? I think that needs to be something that is at the forefront of college education and curriculum.
So colleges, according to Nick Taliaferro, you need to develop some core curriculum that deals with developing soft skills in students. Make sure that you develop those soft skills such as conflict resolution. How do you build relationships? Because those will be valuable to you as you pursue your professional careers. And they're also very valuable to you personally.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're absolutely welcome. And thank you for the privilege.
A special thank you to the incredible team of the Empowerment Zone. Terry Gully, theme song. NADWorks, digital support, and of course, our featured guest.